Hey, Mike here. Since the Atlantis episode went over so well, let's do a part 2 looking at the technology of Atlantis. If we consider that there was a great global civilization before the flood, what was it like and what technologies did they have? I'm going to be discussing ancient pre-flood population and the kind of energy sources which they had access to, which we have unfortunately lost, and what technologies powered it, and what technologies it powered. So let's get into it. I'm going to start with the basic stuff that's not too controversial and build to examples of high-tech devices including space stations and tablet computers in the ancient world. By the way, this is of course part 2 to the video on Atlantis, which we found in the description. To begin with the ancient world and what it was like, let's start with population. To understand the growth of technology, you have to understand which forces drive it, and a big factor is population density. This is because you need food and fuel. In our modern world, you need the wheel to carry food, since farms are some distance from the city. Now, to buy or sell food, you eventually need a form of currency. You need a way to track that. You need an engine to drive that wheel to carry more food. Eventually, you need GPS to track the vehicle, and internet to operate the systems to buy and sell it. After a while, it just gets easier to launch satellites into orbit than it is to maintain ground-based communication systems. Just a few thousand years after after we've grown a world population of 8 billion now, from a world population of just 8 who survived a flood 4,300 years ago, despite lower birth rates and lifespans. On the very day Noah and his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, together with his wife and the wives of the 3 sons who entered the ark, keep in mind there's one that didn't, they survived along with the distant ancestors of every kind of animal we see on Earth today. And by kind, I mean like canines, felines, bovine, etc. Okay, so what was the world population before the flood? Given the shorter amount of time to grow the population, and then add in the longer lifespans and longer childbearing years, the math gets complicated, but it works out to about 4 billion. Or the world population of the modern 1980s. Granted, the population was not solely Homo sapien. We know there was a number of hybrid creatures called the Nephilim. They were half human, half fallen angel. And of course, other species like Neanderthal and stuff. That's not all there is. As energy and resources play a big part in this once you get going, animal power gets expensive as you have to feed and water them. They get sick and even die. We have oil from all the organic materials, plants, animals, and a lot of people, which were buried in the flood. Think about that when you're driving a car. But the pre-flood world did not have this advantage. It's hard to imagine a world without oil. But what they had was this element known to the ancient Greeks and the ancient Egyptians as orichalcum, and to the ancient Hebrews as zoar. Some accounts describe it as being a crystal, others a metal. Consider how my phone's screen is made of sapphire, which is a metallic oxide in crystalline form. If you have a Samsung phone, this is what your screen is. Now the difference is that zoar would emit light. Orichalcum was said to shine brilliantly. So, same thing. Crazy. Not exactly crazy. Light is just magnetic radiation. And there are plenty of radioactive materials that take on crystalline form. You've probably heard of uranium glass. Of course, these forms of radiation are not in the visible spectrum, but maybe this one was. We don't know of anything like this in the modern world, but then again, we don't know what the half-life of this material was, and our world is almost 6,000 years old. This could have decayed into something like radon by now. I know you're thinking a glowing element makes good light. But how far does that take you? Well, take this glowing element, slap some solar panels on it, and you've got a really long-lasting power source now. Consider this. Phones that don't need to be charged. Electric cars and planes that don't need to be charged, for that matter. And they don't need to be refueled often either. Like a nuclear submarine that needs to be refueled every 50 years. Imagine a phone lasting 50 years on a single charge. This Zoar, sliced into sheets and placed between sets of solar panels or similar structure, would make a great power source, which would rarely need to be replaced. So, whether or not this Zoar was a power source of the ancient world, others call it orichalcum, is an interesting question. But there are a number of other slightly less ancient technologies, such as bimetallic acid cell batteries and wood-burning steam power. This is in more recent history, the last couple thousand years though. And a good evidence of nuclear power, which is something I'll get back to. This is where we must look to ancient technology and ancient mythology for parallels to modern technology. We're going to dig in to discover the truth behind these myths and what evidence we have for these conclusions. I'll start with a simple one. Many cultures have a myth of building megalithic structures with huge stones via a process of magically liquefying the stone and pouring it in to molds or molding it into place. What is this? Well, it's obviously concrete. In fact, in our slightly less ancient history, we know for a fact that Romans had great concrete, which they used extensively, better than our own. Imagine the pyramids or other ancient structures being built of a sort of high quartz concrete stock. You look to the Inca sites, such as Atlantean. I probably pronounced that really wrong. You will see what appears to be blocks which were not 100% cured when the supports were removed, resulting in them kind of molding together and having a melty look, which does give a very strong fit though. This could be an interesting architectural strategy to make very strong, large concrete walls. Okay, yeah, concrete's a great technology, used to build impressive structures, but I know that's not what you're here for, not in this video. So the ancient Egyptians had various kinds of drilling tools, which likely had diamond-tipped tools, tube drills, and even large circular saws, which cut using some kind of abrasive substance. Could be sand. There's evidence of this, the cutting of granite and harder stones with tools indicating a tubular or circular blade. Power tools are cool, but what else do we see? In ancient Egyptian structures, we see examples of deep and dark locations with no examples of soot from torches that would have been lit. But what is there? There is a carving in Deandra which, in some of the context around it, shows a possible creation myth. But the image itself actually depicts a perfect schematic of the working of a mercury vapor lamp. They could even be making a comparison between their own ancient mythology and current technology, like I do on this very channel. Combine this with batteries a few kilometers north in Baghdad, and you have electric lighting. That's useless. That is unless they use Zoar. But the ones a few kilometers north of Egypt over Baghdad, they could have been used for other things like electroplating metal. It's a simple bimetallic acid battery, and a good number of them have been found. But why so many if it's for something simple and specific? They could have easily been, they were very eco-friendly designed. They could have easily been rebuilt. Components and acid could be switched out and instead of being replaced. Imagine, I know with forklifts a lot will have batteries serviced instead of destroyed. Perhaps this was the powerhouse for lighting and other various devices used on a daily basis. Instead of having power lines, You could have just had batteries connected to your house that you replace the acids and metals from time to time. In India, we start to see really interesting depictions of technologies like flying metal cities above the clouds with their nation's leaders at war with each other. There were flying metal boats with fire coming out of them, and they could fight. It's like a fighter jet. And then rocket-powered weapons, which are impressive, but the ancient Chinese are recorded having rocket-powered weapons. That's nothing new and nothing controversial. But what about the warheads? There's something called the Brahmastra. The Brahmastra was a weapon which all of the ancient world agreed, do not use this. No matter who's winning or losing a war, we don't use this weapon. That's because it can destroy the world. Eventually, one of these was dropped, weirdly enough, from orbit, from a flying metal city. And this produced a light brighter than the sun, a strong wind which knocked over entire cities. That's an intense explosion. However, this weapon also cursed the land. This land, this curse, it turns your skin white. Make sure, keep in mind, this is India, so middle brown skin was normal. It turned your skin white to lose all color. It makes your teeth and hair fall out, and fingernails too. Sores break out all over your body before you start vomiting and die. Well, these are actually symptoms of severe radiation poisoning. This is a nuclear bomb being dropped from a space station or some other space-based platform during a war. If you think we don't have these now, look up U.S. government records of non-terrestrial officers. Those 3 words are the key. It's not talking about aliens, it's talking about human beings, astronauts in our military in orbit. There are a number of ancient myths. Another good one is the process of scrying. This is an occult practice where a person stares into what is usually a dark mirrored surface and they gain knowledge. Then again, I wrote the script for this and I'm recording this using a device that is essentially a black mirrored surface that I can look into and gain the sum total of all human knowledge. And for all you, anyone who's into like occult practices, which you should not be, this device is full of crystals, silicon crystals. The structure of these is a processor and then the storage devices, which are also crystalline structures made of silicon. The lithium crystal structure for the battery. It would seem almost magical if you didn't know how this worked. This is not magic, this is technology. Lithium crystal for power, silicon crystal for storage and processing. And that's the point here. Imagine all electricity goes away right now. All the electronics go in the trash. Now, decades later, you explain what a smartphone was to your great-grandchildren. And they tell it to their great-grandchildren. This is a real physical device. And it becomes a tale of a magical object, which gives you mystical knowledge. You can hear and speak, you can hear the dead speak in video. You can know anything you wish to know so long as any other human knows it. It's the internet. You can communicate with others through phone services. The myth of the scrying mirror is a distorted explanation of a tablet computer or smartphone. What they call the Akashic Records is merely an ancient search engine, probably. Like we would say you could Google it. They would say you'd search for it in the Akashic Records. There's nothing magical here. This is examples of ancient technology. And this is all due to the conditions of the pre-flood world. So I'm going to go ahead and end this here. And if this video gets a lot of likes and shares, I'll release a second part to this with even more interesting ancient technologies that have been mistaken for mythological magic. Keep in mind, magic's not real, but ancient technology is what led to the myths. If you liked this, go ahead and like the video, share the video, and subscribe. And more importantly, have a blessed day.